Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Ahead of the Curve, Architectural Solar and How to Pay for It. My name is Joshua Kagan, and I'm Vice President of Business Development for CleanFund Commercial Pace Capital. Today, we're going to be speaking about a compelling technology that's aesthetically beautiful, reduces carbon emissions, and is economically viable. You can't say that there's too many of those out there in the market. And it's something that's starting to take off in the built environment. So our webinar is going to begin with an overview of recent trends in green buildings by Rob Watson, followed by an introduction to architectural glass by Chris Klinga of Solaria, and a discussion of how to pay for architectural glass using PACE financing by myself. And then we'll go back to Chris to present a case study, followed by questions and answers. If you have questions, feel free to type them into the panel, which should be on the right side of your screen. Our first speaker is Rob Watson, who is considered in the industry as the founding father of LEED. Under Rob's direction, LEED became the largest and fastest growing international green building standard. He's spent time with the Natural Resource Defense Council, and he's now working with the Econ Group, which is a building optimization company that optimizes both environmental performance as well as economic returns. Our second speaker is Chris Klinga, who is with Solaria and has 10 years of experience as a trained mechanical engineer and a licensed structural engineer. He's also a leader within the Architectural Solar Association. Solaria is a technology company that's created a platform that unlocks the potential for solar in buildings. It is reducing costs, improving efficiencies, and pioneering a decentralized power generation, enabling the trend towards sustainable building and supporting architects and developers likewise. And I am Joshua Kagan. I'm the Vice President of Business Development at CleanFund. My background is I've been working in renewable energy finance for the last 9 years. Previously, I ran the Energy Efficiency and Buildings Division of the Carbon War Room, which was a market-based, a nonprofit created by Richard Branson to use market-based force to tackle climate change. And prior to that, I was a senior analyst at Atlas Capital, which is a renewable energy venture capital firm. CleanFund is a commercial pace capital provider, and I'll kind of explain more about that later in the webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Rob.
Thanks so much, Josh. Appreciate you all joining us this morning. Hope the weather is beautiful wherever you are. Sitting here in New York, we've had the warmest fall on record, and I know that's just a small snapshot, but it is an indicator of the magnitude of the issue that we're facing. It's not a big secret that greenhouse gas emissions continually climb globally as population grows, as economic activity continues, and the scientists have given us a pretty clear directive that we need to reduce carbon emissions by 80% by 2050, and that's even on top of forecast population growth of about 15–20% compared to what we have today. The reason buildings are so important for this is that they use more energy and emit more greenhouse gases than any other human activity on the planet. And so, starting about 20 years ago, a group of us, the U.S. Green Building Council, got together and created the LEED Green Building Rating System. And I think by, most measures, LEED has been phenomenally successful. I think we've done we've had a really good start beginning to move the market forward. But, in the 30 years of experience I have, it's also become very clear to me that the market as it's structured is not capable of hitting that 80% reduction by 2050, mainly because it's too diffuse, that there are too many independent players with differing objectives out there, and that the only way we can get to the kinds of emissions reductions that we need is to have integrated teams that are basically assigned to buildings over their life, from design through construction on into operation, the same group of people responsible for it, not unlike you have with ships, for example. And the amount of information available to all the players at different parts of the life cycle, results in very significant asymmetries between service providers and developers, and that's got to stop. And the perverse incentives between tenants and landlords also impede progress from happening. A lot of these problems will be overcome by some of the technologies and some of the financial instruments that we'll be talking about later today. We're also seeing significant improvements in sensor technologies that allow networking, communication, and optimization within and between systems and subsystems at the floor level in a building, at the building level. And what we'll be seeing very soon is information and utilities being shared between buildings and eventually between groups of buildings. So rather than the grid being a central system pushing out commodities, whether they be energy or water, they will become more of a battery and a network of microgrids sharing information and utility services. So although green is the new norm in new construction in many parts of the world, we still have had a very hard time penetrating the existing buildings, and so greater integration between people who are responsible for building design and building operation will help that. One of the biggest challenges we faced in creating LEED was the fact that the building operator world is completely different from the design and development world, and that in real estate and finance, that buildings have almost nothing to do with the transaction. It's all about location and finance. And so it's it's a good thing that we've got these innovations in finance and that we've got these new advances in technology. Can we move to the next slide? Particularly starting with the design phase. The design tools are finally catching up. We're able to model much more effectively how buildings use energy and be much more accurate with that. And now that we've got the ability to produce power on a lot more of the building envelope, net zero is increasingly accessible to larger and larger footprints, and the ability to not cherry pick energy efficiency and integration with solar through the quote-unquote value engineering process is one of the big things that PACE will allow us to do. I mean, historically, the problem is that the guys in the boiler room are asked to provide ROIs that the C-suite couldn't hit in a million years, and then when they succeed in hitting those 1 to 2 year paybacks, 50 to 100% ROIs, which, like I said, no executive in the history of buildings has ever been able to hit in real estate, they get their budget cut and their staff cut. So with an incentive, incentives facing the boiler room like that, it's no wonder that energy efficiency is so popular. So eventually, what we need to do is recognize that real estate is location building, that buildings are in fact strategic assets, they're brand assets, they're ways of attracting and keeping the best people, and that they should be treated as such, not simply as cost centers that need to be managed. So what we'll be hearing from Chris Klinga and Josh are not only some of the technology innovations that help us bridge that final 20 to 25% in building energy efficiency that makes truly net zero and climate friendly buildings, and also some of the financial mechanisms that will make integrated design over the life cycle of a building finally cost effective and feasible. Take it away, Chris.
Well, thank you, Rob, and thank you, Joshua, for the great intro. I'm excited to share with everybody the potential behind combining Solaria's architectural solar technologies with CleanFund, SEAPACE program, and you can go on to the next slide, please. As many of you may know, Solaria has its roots in low concentration PV, starting back in the early 2000s. Over the past few years, Solaria has developed a line of architectural solar products leveraging its vast intellectual property around simulating solar cells. And we can go on to the next slide, which shows the exact Solaria product suite. The Solaria product suite consists of products that have those singulated solar cells in place across 3 different areas of interest. First being the PowerVision product, which is typically a vision glass product that with very thin 1/8-inch strip silicon solar cells, as you can see there. That product is utilized in vision glass to reduce solar heat gain or replace a conventional frit. It can also be utilized in spandrel applications where the tone of the building is very important, and a black opaque power spandrel type solution isn't really desired. The PowerVision product can be applied with a ceramic frit coating to dictate the color tone of the building while still providing energy. And then lastly, the PowerXT product is Solaria's standardized solar offering for the rooftop. It's a high efficiency panel, and it's the same exact technology that's utilized in their power spandrel product. And what's unique about both those technologies is that they don't utilize bus bars across the front of the cells. So architecturally, it's far superior. The efficiencies that you see on the PowerXT product is in line with the SunPower products, the highest efficiency modules on the market today. And the power spandrel product is of the same cell efficiency, but since architectural solutions have a thicker glass and different properties that reduce efficiencies such as black appearance, the efficiency is brought down a little bit. The PowerVision product is typically a 43% coverage ratio on the frit pattern, and its watts per square foot is right around 6 watts per square foot versus the power spandrel, which is around 16. You can go on to the next slide. So the clear advantage for Solaria is, and BIPV in general, or we like to call it, as we like to call it, architectural solar, is the multifunctional nature of the products and what they bring to the table on that front. And here you can see a list of applications that the product can be applied, from simple rooftop PV being the first stage, which really doesn't have any multifunctional advantage beyond the energy production, but then all the way down to vertical vision glazing. And as you go down, you get more integrated, and you can see that the multifunctional benefits increase. So first and foremost, in canopies, we see that we can create weather barriers, so a roof over someone's head, shading, then down to architectural structures. We can create messaging for a business to really bring their brand awareness front and center to their building if it's an architectural structure. And some of the other ones that people don't know about, you know, in balustrades, you're basically getting multifunctional safety out of the product. Bird safe applications, so when you have an atrium with vision glass that has potential for bird impact, the Solaria PowerVision product serves as a frit, as making the glass bird safe. And the list goes on and on. Another one to speak of is just the fact that when you're integrating solar technologies, you're having to utilize a laminate on the outbound light, and that creates a better sound barrier. And all of these things come with the Solaria advantage of better appearance, higher efficiency, bifacial capability, and then the fact that our singulated frit technology can really double as a ceramic frit. So you're reducing the solar heat gain coefficient of a building as well as making it bird safe, or controlling glare. Go on to the next slide, please. So the really interesting thing to me is what SEAPACE can do to the Solaria offering. As we go across the application classes and we get more integrated into the facade of a building, the multifunctional value goes up, as we discussed, but it's also more difficult to implement the technology. And the more integrated it is, the more beneficial and the SEAPACE is, and the easier it is for us to implement SEAPACE. So you can go on to the next slide. Today, the cost of solar has been reduced dramatically because of the reduction in cost of silicon. And as you can see here, the cost per square foot, which is the way we like to look at things in the building industry, has gone, when we look at solar from just a sheer square footage perspective. Commercial solar energy was started in 2009 at $64 or $65 per square foot, and now it's down around $28 per square foot. We're approaching dollar per square foot levels that are in line with several building technologies that you apply to a facade, which is really interesting. Next slide. So the next step is really to understand what is BIPV, or architectural solar cost. And what I've done is provided you guys with a simple baseline installation cost to utilize that's based on the NREL benchmark costing that's been done over the past couple of years. This particular number is based on the 2016 data, but 2017 recently came out, so it does need to be updated. But the good news is it's just going down. So if we look at the baseline installation cost, this is the costs that are intrinsic to any solar system, whether it's just the electrical wiring, things that we don't necessarily take into account, well, things that are taken into account across a architectural solar system versus a standard solar system, and they're always the same from a cost per watt perspective. And then we add the incremental cost of a BIPV module, and that can range anywhere from 62 cents a watt to 350 a watt, depending on the architectural application. And we get to our total incremental cost, which is around $27 to $70 per square foot, depending on a number of factors. Next slide. And then the important thing to note is that when we model the cost of solar in architectural applications, is we're modeling the incremental cost, not necessarily the entire cost, because there's multifunctional attributes that would go along with any any installation that doesn't have solar. So for instance, a curtain wall. A typical curtain wall costs anywhere from $80 to $120 per square foot. In our case study later on, we'll assume $80 per square foot. And the interesting thing here is, well, what do we apply the ITC to? Do we just apply it to the incremental cost of solar, or do we get to take some of the benefit of the curtain wall? And there is precedence in the market for taking even 100% of the curtain wall into the ITC, and that would amount to, in the case of an $80 per square foot curtain wall, would amount to $34 to $51 per square foot. In our analysis, we like to use 50% impact of the ITC, because there are certain ways that solar can be integrated where you might not be able to realize that full benefit. So in our analysis, we'll be using $17 to $26 per square foot. So just to wrap it up, there's a symbiotic relationship right now between architectural solar and SEAPACE. Architectural solar enables SEAPACE to encompass more of the building's cost, while SEAPACE enables financing for integrated applications, which would otherwise be hard to finance. So I think that there's something that's really going to, this is something that's really going to push BIPV to the next level. As Rob discussed, it's completely critical that we look at the building as a holistic solution, and SEAPACE lets us get there. So on to Joshua, who will talk more about CleanFund SEAPACE offering, and then I will take it from there with a quick case study.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Rob. Great job thus far. This is Joshua Kagan, Vice President of Business Development with CleanFund. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to share a couple slides. First one on a kind of a CleanFund overview, and then followed by kind of what is PACE, and kind of what problems does PACE solve and how does it do it, and then focus on some of the measures that PACE can finance, and talk about sort of the economics of PACE and why it has the highest net present value of any other financial mechanism for solar, followed by the process of how to identify and get a PACE project done, and then I'm going to kick it back to Chris, as he mentioned, with the case study. So CleanFund, we were founded in 2009. We are 100% laser focused on commercial PACE from day one. That's all we've ever done, and that's all we will ever do. We're not residential PACE capital providers. We're not residential administrators. We're just commercial PACE capital providers. To date, we've funded more commercial PACE projects than anyone in the market. We're a national player. We're pretty much anywhere where commercial PACE is live. And I have a slide later that's going to show that 33 states have passed enabling legislation, and there's about 19 states that have up and running programs. And PACE is rolling out across the whole country. I mean, last month, Mayor de Blasio of New York City announced the upcoming launch of the New York PACE program, and Massachusetts is 60 days away or so from launching, and several other states have passed enabling legislation recently, like Nevada and Illinois. So we see a day in the relatively near future where PACE is going to be in all 50 markets, or all 50 states, I should say. And CleanFund, we really exist to make renewable energy and energy efficiency simple, easy, and profitable for building owners as well as our partners. So what is PACE? PACE is an acronym for Property Assessed Clean Energy. It's a financial mechanism that enables a building owner to borrow 100% of the capital needed to do an energy efficiency, water efficiency, or renewable energy project. And in California, we can also do seismic projects. So in Florida, we can do hurricane strengthening, or strengthening buildings for hurricane resiliency. And to the other panelists, can you please mute the phone? There's some background noise. Thank you. And so it's a financial mechanism. It's not a government program. And I want to be really clear about that. There's no government money associated with PACE whatsoever. It's privately funded, and it began in 2007 in the city of Berkeley, and it borrows from 100 years of assessment financing, which we've been using in our country to pay for things in the public interest. So in the buildings that you're all in right now, it's very likely that the owner of that building, whether it's a home you're in or an office or whatever, on the property tax bill, there's probably line items below it that for assessments for things that are like in the public interest, whether it's paving the sidewalk or the local fire department building, or local public school system, and PACE is just another voluntary assessment that gets added to the property tax bill. And that's all PACE is. It's a mechanism that gets secured to the property tax bill, and it gets repaid via the property tax bill. But there's lots of implications for this very kind of simple mechanism, and that is, go back, Vanessa. We'll stay on that slide for a sec. The implications are, because we're repaid by the property taxes are very secure. Property owners pay their property taxes. So this is very secure lending. Because of that, we're able to do things that traditional lenders can't do. Things like, 30-year terms that are fixed rate and it's non-recourse to the borrower, meaning that if the building owner doesn't pay their property tax bill, we can't go after their personal assets. And if the building owner decides to ever sell their building, they never have to repay us. So, PACE, and I'll kind of walk through this maybe a little bit later, but PACE is neither, equity nor debt. It kind of has attributes of both, but it's maybe a little too technical for right now. Next slide, please. So what is PACE trying to solve, or what can it solve? The biggest one, from my perspective at least, is the high upfront cost of energy efficiency systems and equipment, CapEx basically. As Rob said earlier, there's a tendency for some owners, or a lot of real estate owners, to look at energy efficiency from a prism of I only want things that have 3-year paybacks or have a return of 30% annual return. PACE, we're able to provide 100% of the upfront costs of systems And because we're able to do things like 20, 30-year financing, all of a sudden it kind of changes the conversation away from payback, because items that have 10 or 12-year paybacks, quote unquote, are now cash flow positive from day one. And we're able to integrate systems that otherwise would be financed or paid for in a piecemeal way, or not paid for at all unless something breaks, right? Like a chiller. You know, the most expensive chiller is the one that has to be replaced in the middle of the night, right? And with PACE, we're able to help owners look holistically at CapEx budgets over the coming years and figure out not just what needs to be done, but what they would like to be done. If we were trying to structure something that would be cash flow positive. So it moves beyond a tendency for only going after low-hanging fruit and simple paybacks of 3 or 4 years. Additionally, PACE is not really debt. Property taxes are considered operating expenses, and we have to be careful not to give. We tell our clients that we don't give accounting and tax advice, and we don't. And PACE enables borrowers to not have to use their own equity and or their debt lines, their credit lines. So PACE is its own its own mechanism that's it's neither debt nor equity. It also has the potential to overcome the split incentives that can exist in certain types of buildings, like office buildings, and Rob alluded to this earlier. So why would an owner pay for architectural glass or a standalone PV system where their tenants are going to benefit from the reduced utilities, and yet the tenants don't pay for it? The answer is that they don't, and they won't, right? And with PACE, because in triple net leases, meaning the tenants are paying the operating expenses of the building, one of the operating expenses happens to be the real estate taxes, the owner can potentially pass the PACE payment onto the tenants who's getting the benefit of the reduced utilities. And that's very powerful, because now we're aligning incentives between owners and tenants and giving tenants and owners an incentive to invest in renewable energy and energy efficiency systems. And last, historically, why would an owner invest in a comprehensive retrofit or technology like architectural glass? They're going to sell the building in 3 years. They invest all this upfront money, but then the next buyer is going to get the benefit of it without paying for it. And PACE resolves this by being able to be passed on to the next buyer. Next slide. So what can be financed? In general, the main buckets for something to qualify as PACE eligible consist of energy efficiency, water efficiency, renewable energy, and seismic in California, and storm strengthening in Florida. So energy efficiency is a very wide bucket of items that it encompasses. I mean, it's basically anything that touches an electron and is considered permanently affixed to the property. So it could be mechanical equipment, electrical equipment, roof, glass, windows. It can be, controls, things of that nature, envelope. Related to water, it could be pumps, irrigation, low flow fixtures. And on the renewable side, to date, most of the renewable projects that have qualified for that we've done with PACE include solar, storage, and EV charging stations. And so, PACE is a very powerful financial technology to enable new and compelling technologies to achieve commercialization. And these technologies might have higher upfront costs than kind of more older established technologies, and building owners might balk at the upfront cost, and having a mechanism that enables 30-year financing behind it is pretty compelling. And that's where I see part of the value add for architectural glass. Next slide. So this is going to be kind of hard to read, but basically what this graph is showing is that SolarPACE, when compared to other financing mechanisms for solar, whether it's leases, loans, power purchase agreement, or if an owner uses cash, is going to have the highest net present value of any financial mechanism out there. And the reason for that, there's a couple. One, we're able to do, as I said earlier, up to 30-year terms. So the annual cash flow is going to be, it's going to be lower payments than other mechanisms with shorter duration. Second is, with PACE, the owner gets to keep all the tax benefits. The owner keeps the investor tax credit, the maker's depreciation, if they're eligible for 179D or any utility rebates, any other performance-based incentives, RECs, etc. Now, we do have a structure for those owners who don't have tax appetite, which is our PACE PPA, SolarPACE PPA, where we have a tax equity partner who will come in and take the ITC and the makers and contribute between 15 and 20% back to the deal. So it effectively reduces the upfront cost of the architectural glass or the PV system by 15 to 20%. But I won't go into details about that right now because it's a little complicated and I'm on a short leash in terms of time. But I'll just to reiterate that SolarPACE does have the highest NPV of any financial mechanism out there. So last slide, how to get a project done. So basically, how we would work is if you have a project that you think is PACE eligible, i.e. it reduces energy in a building. Let's say you're an architect and you find this architectural glass compelling and you reach out to Solaria. How we would work, Solaria would bring us this project and we would look at it and we'd say, yeah, this is in a PACE in a PACE eligible area and architectural glass qualifies for PACE. And so we would issue a term sheet. And if the owner agrees to the terms, we would ask them to fill out a one-page application. From there, we'd issue a letter of intent, and upon signing it, we'd do a kickoff call with one of our underwriters and walk the owner through kind of all the steps to closing. It's a very quick call, but basically closing consists of doing three things. One is underwriting the project, so getting all the docs we need to just underwrite it like any kind of financing. Second is to get program approval, and that consists of, there's program administrators in place, PACE program administrators, to make sure that there's no abuses, that we're actually financing architectural glass and not owners, trips to Vegas, things like that. And third is we get consent of the primary lender, mortgage holder on the property. And we do those three things, and then we can close within a couple weeks. And closing consists of money going to an escrow account and being dispersed to the contractors, no different than any other construction loan. So from a process standpoint, I think folks will find that it's actually pretty simple and efficient and similar to stuff that they've seen already in the marketplace. And with that, I'm going to pass back to Chris, who's going to walk through a case study. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshua. So we can go on to the next slide, Vanessa. Yeah, I'm excited to show you guys this case study that we did. This is for a building in California, and we've applied the Power Vision product to the vision glass on the west facade, as well as a portion of the south facade, and that's in the upper 30% of the vision glass, so not typically at eye level, but in this given instance, there's a 10-foot bay, and the upper 3 feet had vision glass in them. The other thing we did was we applied power spandrel to the spandrel areas, and overall the power that we got out of this particular setup of this commercial office building. Okay, yeah. So the power that we got out of this this setup was around 25 kilowatts for the Power Vision, and 277 kilowatts for the power spandrel, amounting to about 303 kilowatts total. You can see the area that took up, and the average efficiency, which we like to call the EUI of solar, essentially, is how much energy is it producing. And then there's also a performance savings modeled from the Power Vision product, because it's reducing the solar heat gain coefficient of the building itself. And you know, the other big point to mention here is that the rooftop system on this building was right around 200 kilowatts and produced around 292,000 kilowatt hours per year. By adding architectural solar to this building, we nearly doubled the kilowatt hour production, and that's pretty interesting to me because that's a lot of potential as far as, you know, a net zero equation and what is possible. And keep in mind that we didn't apply the PowerVision product to all of the vision glass. It's in a very select area. The Power Spandrel product is across the south, the east, and the west faces, but overall, it's not an audacious amount of architectural solar integrated into the project, and it is increasing the kilowatt hour potential by quite a bit by doubling it. So next slide. And here are some of, you know, just the details of the assumptions that we used, because they really drive the analysis. You know, the big take homes are like the utility rate, which is 13.5 cents. And that's pretty conservative for California. We assume that to be the offsettable rate. Yeah, there's higher rates in California, but how much of them are, how much is offsettable is, you know, a big factor. And I think 13.5 cents is a good metric to use. Our incremental baseline cost was that $1.17 that I talked about previously. The incremental module cost, we used $40 a square foot for this. And then we also said that there was a frit offset on this job. So in this particular instance, the architect was specifying a frit in the vision glass, and we replaced that with the PowerVision product. So we took a $10 per square foot off of those select areas, which ended up being 25% of the overall area. You can go on to see it. This will be for your viewing pleasure after the webinar, so we won't get into the weeds too much, but the other big thing to note is that we assumed a 30-year term for the PACE financing and 100% debt fraction. So on to the next slide. So if you just take a high-level look at what the real savings are and where they come from, we've got the total incremental cost at $387 a watt, or $54 a square foot. And so that includes the frit cost reduction and the incremental module cost and the baseline installation cost. And you know, that number gets then added to the baseline curtain wall cost to get the total install cost. So in this instance, we're looking at installing the system for $134 per square foot, or $135 per square foot. And that number there is then utilized. Well, the ITC component is then calculated off of half of the curtain wall, which is $40 per square foot. So the curtain wall as a whole is $80. We're going to take half of that as the ITC tax basis. And then on the solar component, we're going to count that entire incremental cost of $54.50. So we get a total ITC tax basis of $94.50. And at the ITC value at the end of year one is $28 per square foot. And the depreciation value at the end of year 6 is $32. So you take those two numbers together, and that's $54.50. Is greater than $54.50, meaning that the system pays back far less than 6 years. And in this case, I think it's around a 3.5-year payback. But that's a moot point, because if we finance with PACE, the cash flows are you're not having that burden on day one. So we don't even need to really talk about the payback in terms of that. So next slide. And if we just sum all that up and we look at the total installed incremental cost and the tax deductible operating expenses and all the savings that we see, you know, the end of year one cost is around $19 per square foot. And that's very much palatable from an architectural standpoint, in my opinion. Next slide. So we take all that and we then put in the SEAPACE equation, and here are the metrics that we're utilizing on that end as far as how much interest is included, and fees and the total amount that's financed. So in this instance, we're financing the incremental cost of PV. You can certainly finance more than that. There's argument that you could finance the full portion of the curtain wall that's applicable to the PV, but in this case, we just finance the incremental cost. Next slide. And in the end, what's important here is that the net benefit over the next 5 years is the fact that there's $1 million more in your pocket in this particular case study. And that's because your electric bill is going down while your property tax bill is going up, and your income tax bill is going down by quite a bit. So it's a great equation to enable BIPV in buildings, and I'm super excited to be able to have SEAPACE at my disposal for this exact reason. Next. And I'll let Joshua or Rob take it from here, and we'll be able to get you guys questions answered if questions have come up.
Thanks so much, Chris. Well, I think we've heard a lot of really great information, both from the technical side and the financial side. The really great thing for me, again, is that we can finally do real integrated design and not worry about it being value engineered out. That we can really get to cost-effective net zero buildings using, granted, slightly unconventional finance, but all of the basic tools slot into processes and procedures and analysis that everybody is quite familiar with. So that way, you don't have to go sticking your neck out to bring in very significant innovations into a building, and we can show that it pencils out a lot more effectively using mechanisms like SEAPACE, and it'll mainly be getting CFOs and designers up to speed on the implications of this, as well as having a lot more availability of these mechanisms throughout the U.S. So and the world, clearly. I mean, the U.S. is not growing very much in terms of floor area, and most of the new development and the lost opportunities are happening overseas. So to really take advantage of this innovation, we need to figure out how to adapt the financing mechanism, to places where there continues to be very significant growth in new construction, and then also figure out, to the extent that there are differences between project financing and project refinancing. I'm sort of, telegraphing to Joshua one of the questions I'm going to have. That will finally allow this convergence of improved design, modern technology, and 21st century financing mechanisms to allow the true potential of building sustainability to be realized, on a large scale. And so we've got a few questions from the audience, and so I'm going to kick off from that first. So I believe this question would be for Joshua, and the question is PACE available for government programs? And I'm going to assume that means projects that are either partially or fully funded using taxpayer dollars.
Okay. Yeah, great question. So PACE can only be used on privately owned buildings. So government-owned buildings do not qualify. But there's some nuance. So, and the reason why they don't qualify is that governments don't pay property taxes. But you might say, well, nonprofits don't pay property taxes. And that is correct, but nonprofits can and do pay property assessments. So that's why we're able to finance nonprofits. The other nuance is that we're able to finance a building that has a ground lease that's owned by a government. So for instance, when we financed Prologis' headquarters at Pier 1 in San Francisco, technically the Port of San Francisco was the owner of the land, and we had to get their approval, which they gave, and that was that's sort of the nuance. But if the government actually owns the building, whether it's municipal or federal, we can't provide PACE financing for it.
Thanks so much, Joshua. Another question about PACE is, and maybe you may need to ask for clarification on this, but how does the new tax bill address the tax financing just shown?
So I'm not an expert in the new tax bill or of tax law in general. From my understanding, well, let me back up and say that PACE is passed at the state level and not the federal level. So there's been, just to sort of name it, people have had concerns, oh, is Trump or the administration and their sort of anti-fossil fuels outlook going to try to kill PACE? And the answer is no. There's nothing that I've read at least or heard that that is going to inhibit states' ability to continue to collect, to pass PACE enabling legislation in counties to collect the assessment. Regarding things like no longer writing off, interest deductions and other things, honestly, it's really nuanced, and I don't have up-to-date information right now, and I'd be kind of remiss to speculate. So I'm gonna politely decline to answer it.
Thank you, Joshua. Flipping over to Chris, a question came in regarding the case study. And this questioner wanted to know if the square foot numbers were based on floor area or envelope area, wall area.
They're based on wall area, so the area of the actual product, because if otherwise it wouldn't be an apples to apples comparison.
Okay. Thanks a lot. You in one of your earlier, I'm going to ask one of my own questions before I go back to an audience question for Joshua. But so in your slide about the remarkable ongoing reduction in solar installation costs, I'm just curious, where, if any place, do you see future cost reductions coming from, and how they might be implemented?
All right. Well, I think silicon will continue to be reduced as it has. I think that there's a lot of opportunity in the architectural space to reduce soft costs. So, for instance, how systems are permitted and the O&M expenses associated with solar systems. Typically, those O&M expenses are added to the building, but today in architectural solar, there's a lot of expenses that on the soft cost side that can be kind of bundled with existing technologies. So I see a lot of innovative ways to look at the way we approach the incremental costs of PV and how people basically add up the value of it. But then also from the technology side, which is probably more where you're asking, is I see the building industry integrating solar technologies really driving the cost of architectural solar. So, for instance, the early days of low E was super expensive, but as building industry, such as glass fabricators, integrated low E into their process, costs went down. Today, there aren't really many building industry players, more than a handful that are playing in the solar space, and as it becomes more commoditized, the price will be reduced. And so I think that's really the fuel for the fire.
And do you see any opportunities, for example, because I would imagine that the interconnection with the grid is a fairly substantial cost, but the ability not necessarily to sell into the grid, but to sell into your own, if you will, micro and nanogrids within your building that are set up to take direct voltage power. I mean, the thing that's crazy to me is that 60% of everything in the building is native DC, and we spend all this money and energy converting DC to AC and then back from AC to DC. And I think the cost and power is almost in some cases 25-30% in both directions. So that's like a 50% decrease right there.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I think today I think there's the really interesting thing that I see is this whole battery movement by creating a true distributed grid and putting solar on buildings in a way that actually can offset them to a net zero potential. That is only really interesting when batteries are part of the equation, and otherwise we're going to have to keep modeling 13.5 cents. But when we can take into account demand reduction, the LCOE of solar becomes incredibly competitive. So as battery technologies become more efficient and become lower cost, these economics will get better and better. Excellent,
Chris. Thanks so much. So Joshua, going through your presentation, it's like, what's not to like? And so, what in your mind are the main barriers? I mean, only 15 states actually have SEAPACE in place, and another 16 sort of have it in the pipeline. So, question one is, what's stopping the other states from doing it? Whose ox is getting gored by SEAPACE that they would not, want to jump on this? And number two, from legislative passage to SEAPACE products on the street, what is the approximate time lag in your experience?
Okay, great. Two great questions. So I would say if there was one curveball in the PACE process relative to other financing mechanisms, that is the requirement to get the consent of the primary mortgage holder. And so you might ask yourself, okay, let's say we were going to provide $1 million of architectural glass to a building owner, and they had $10 million of debt on it already. And we went to their lender and we said, hey, Mrs. Lender, we want to get your consent to put for this $1 million PACE financing. And the lender's never heard of PACE before. And she says, oh, what are you all smoking in California? Because there's no way I'm going to consent for $1 million to be ahead of my $10 million, right? And the reason why I'd be quote unquote ahead is that in a workout situation, property taxes are paid above everything else, ahead of everything else. And we would say to the lender, we'd say, that's a very natural reaction. We would have that reaction too. But actually the amount that's ahead of any outstanding debt is a function of 1 year's property taxes. Let me explain a little bit further. As I said earlier, in the buildings that you all are in right now, it's very likely that on the property tax bill, there's assessment. If you looked at the bill below the line, at the bottom of the bill, there's going to be assessments for snow removal or paving the sidewalk, etc. Those assessments can go out 50 years. Okay. In the event of a default situation, future assessments and property taxes do not accelerate. What that means in English is that, let's say $1 million repaid over 30 years at 6.25% is $80,000 a year repayment. The amount that's ahead of any of the outstanding debt is really a function of this year's property taxes. So in this case, we're asking for consent of $80,000 to be placed ahead of the $10 million, not $1 million. That's a much more palpable ask, considering that we're also enhancing the value of the building by financing $1 million of architectural glass.
You actually hit on one of the questions I was about to ask you. So if you could just talk about how the asset value increases when you're done with this, what does that look like? That would be great.
Okay. So just the long and the short of it is that we have, as a company, a track record of, I think we're getting consent from lenders around 90%, and it's been increasing month after month as more and more lenders are getting their head around that PACE actually isn't this big, scary thing that's trying to encumber their assets or prime them, to speak lender speak, and actually the amount that's really ahead is quite de minimis. And that's how we're able to get consent. So to answer your question about what is the holdup, that's the one part of the process that can make it take longer than a normal financing. And sometimes we get consent on one conversation with the lender. Okay, you asked two other questions. One of them relates to building value. Is a building that has architectural solar, more valuable than one that doesn't? I mean, intuitively, we'd say yes, right? And to the degree that we can finance measures like, like solar and energy efficiency and things that reduce utilities more than it results in repayment, then we're improving net operating income, and the function of the value of a building is a function of the net operating income times a cap rate. So that's one way we can do it. We're also enhancing, we're paying for things that can be mission critical that if they were to fail would result in the building being worth less. Mechanical equipment and et cetera, roofs that are about to fail, structural elements. So that's another way. What was your second question though, Rob? Because I think I might have missed one of them.
No, I think you hit it really. Just what kind of, I know that the net operating income gets capitalized, and that shows greater asset value. That was really the last part of it. Just before you wrap it up, Joshua, I just wanted to give Chris a couple, just a very short Geek lightning round for some of the building scientists out who are asking some detailed questions. So they wanted to know about the operability of Windows with the Solaria product, and also how the product affects U values.
All right. Well, I would say typically the Solaria products would be applied to non-operable Windows. And that's not to say that operable Windows are out of the question, but they're far better in a non-operable setting. And as far as U values, Solaria's, the product itself, just like a FRIT, is not really going to have an impact on the U value of a window, but it will have a 20% reduction on the solar heat gain coefficient.
Okay, so following up on that, your project was from California. It showed 1/3 additional savings for net HVAC bonuses. Have you done projects in cold climates where maybe shading might reduce heating in the winter, and how that nets out?
I don't have detailed numbers on that, to speak frankly on the subject, but the beauty of this technology is that it can be applied wherever it is suited. So if you're not going to put a FRIT in a cold climate for reasons that you want that passive gain, then you wouldn't put this product there. But if you there's certainly atriums in a cold climate that receive too much passive gain that do need it. So it just apply it where you need it, sort of thing. Does that answer that?
God forbid that we should use common sense in design. Thank you very much. That's okay. I think our time is close to being up. I'm going to let Joshua thank the audience and take us home.
Yeah, well, first I want to say thank you, both Rob and Chris, for participating and lending your expertise and insight. It was a great conversation. I want to thank everyone in the audience. Our contact information should be up on the screen, and so if you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. Thank you, and have a great rest of the day. Take care.